Welcome to the conversation. I'm Paul Grondahl, the director of the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. We're excited today about our guest, David Levine. He's a longtime columnist, journalist, and he's the author of a new book, a fantastic compilation on the Hudson River Valley. It's called The Hudson Valley, the First 250 Million Years, a mostly chronological and occasionally personal history. I love the title. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for inviting me.
So, we knew each other starting in the 1980s, I guess. I was at the Times Union. You came in from Sport Magazine. And the first book you did was that I knew of was Traveling Around with the Patroons. Let's talk about your early roots in Albany and what brought you here, because you didn't grow up here either. Neither did I.
No, I grew up in Western New York, and then I moved to New York City after college and worked there for about 10 years. As you said, most of that at Sport Magazine. Around 1988, I took a job up here with a local magazine that no longer exists. And that didn't quite pan out the way I had hoped.
Which magazine? Is that?
Capital Region?
Yes.
You remember Capital Region?
Yes.
Yes. You were the food critic, or the restaurant reviewer.
There were actually some good years with that magazine, but anyway, we'll talk about, you've been in magazines a long time and you've kind of seen this. So anyway, yeah, so that
didn't work out, and at the same time, I got a contract to do that Patroons book, which was my first book. So that was '88, and I followed the Patroons for the '88-'89 season, and the book came out early 1990. So that was the beginning of my book.
What a wild time! Now, Tim Wilkin, who covered for the Times Union but didn't get to travel, you had such access. I mean, those guys were wild, weren't they? It was like, what's the Will Ferrell movie that's kind of about semi-professional basketball?
Yeah, I can't think the name of it either, but
yeah,
that was pretty close. I mean, it was wild and woolly. I came in a little later than the early days when it was especially wild and woolly, when all the travel was by bus and van and broken down car. When I got there, the league had a little more money and they could fly to more distant cities, but there were still a lot of buses and vans. We still spent some afternoons on the side of the road in a broken down vehicle, stayed at cheap hotels and ate crappy fast food. It was great. It was a blast for me.
Right.
And the stories are just hilarious, the things these guys go through, but also very touching and very personal, because within all of that nonsense, these guys are trying to make a living and they're trying to further their careers. Right. So there's seriousness along with, just total slapstick comedy.
And you had sort of, it's either people trying to move up or the old timers trying to hang on, right, and to get back to the NBA. So Michael Ray Richardson was there then, right? He had a
he was not there. He was there the year before me.
Okay.
So he wasn't there. But the coach was George Karl, who had been in the NBA, had slipped, and was now back in the CBA where he had started. So he was trying to further his career, and as it turned out, he got back to the NBA and became one of the winningest coaches of all time.
Exactly.
But at that time, he was 37 and basically just trying to salvage his coaching career.
Right.
So, he was a great example of that.
So as a journalist, I mean, I've been at it probably about as long as you, I don't know, 40 years or something, but it's all about access and, getting basically people to forget you're there in a way and to just be open and authentic. How much access did you get with the Patroons? Did they let you in anywhere, or were there things like, hey, David, you're not allowed here? Or...
No, that was the great gift that I got when I pitched the idea to George and to his assistant coach, Gerald Oliver, and to the owners. They all thought it was a great idea. And when I said, I want to be everywhere, I want to be on the plane, I want to be in the bus, I want to be in the locker room, I want to sit, as close to the bench as I can, I want to come to the practices, they said, fine, no problem. And as you say, access like that is nearly impossible these days, especially in sports.
Yes.
Because they protect themselves, in the big leagues more than the little leagues, but they are covered by agents and PR people, and they market their brand as strenuously as Nike or Adidas does.
Right.
So I was very lucky. I was everywhere, and I had my little tape recorder hidden and my little notebook hidden, and I'd slink off into the corners and take notes and record them surreptitiously. And they never complained. So I was very fortunate.
Yeah, that was a great book, and it still has a life, right? Because Derek Rowland is trying to bring back the patroons. They're always kind of just trying and trying again. But does that book still sell? Do you get requests to give talks about that experience?
Not really, no. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I mean, it's been out of print for probably as soon as it got into print. You know, it got great reviews and it sold okay in the minor league cities where people knew the CBA, but it's still available online. You can get used copies, of course, on Amazon and all the other places.
Right.
So actually, about 3 months ago, there's a guy who does a podcast that's devoted strictly to defunct leagues and teams. It's really interesting. It's called, what's it called? It's called.
There's a niche for everything, man.
Oh, no, I know. It's called Good Seats Still Available, which I think is a great name.
That's
and
funny.
all his stuff is on defunct teams, athletes. And so he had me on and I got to talk about the book.
That's cool.
It was fun because I hadn't talked about it in probably 25 years. So that was a blast.
I mean, you've done hundreds and hundreds, thousands of articles. Was that one of your most fun assignments? It just seemed like what a blast, although grueling, I'm sure. I mean, you were on the road a lot with those
Yeah.
guys.
It was the most fun. It was the most grueling. You know, I've been covering sports for 10 years, so I knew the world, but I'd never spent 6 months with one team. You know, I'd travel with a team for a couple of days if I was doing a feature on an athlete. But again, they're so protected, they don't really get everywhere. This, I felt like part of the team, and the players, many of the players really opened up to me and accepted me and would tell me, you know, what was going on behind the scenes.
Right.
I couldn't be there, of course, 24/7. And I didn't have the money to travel on every road trip. I think I went out of 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 or something like that. But they would fill me in, you know, I'd say, so what went on when you guys were in Topeka? And they'd tell me. So it was great. It was a blast. It was grueling. One thing I learned was the travel in sports is a lot harder than we fans realize. You know, especially if you're a 6'10", 7'2" basketball player, traveling coach. You know, you've got to squeeze into these little seats.
No leg room.
Often you get into town, you get on the bus, you go right to the arena, and you got to play a pretty high-level basketball game. You know, it's hard, and you do that all year long. Your body takes a beating.
I mean, it's too bad that was pre-social media. I mean, you would have had content on Twitter every day. Did they ever say, like, this is off the record? Because I'm sure you watched The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. That was a tremendous. And they talked pretty openly about the drugs and cocaine. Here was Jordan, the rookie, came into the room where there were women in one room and drugs in there. It's like, whoa.
Right.
Did you see stuff like that, or did they keep that off bounds for you?
I didn't go to the late night parties. We'd go to bars and we'd drink, and I'd see the drinking. I personally didn't see drug use, but I'm sure there was.
Right.
My intent was not to embarrass anybody, and I told them going in, but I wasn't going to print anything that was going to get them in trouble.
Right.
The only time somebody said this is off the record was, I won't say who the player was, but he said something, and he said, if you print that, I'm going to hunt you down and kill you. And he said it good-naturedly, but I believed him. So I didn't print it.
Because you're not 6'10" and 260. I know that, David.
No, and he was 21 and I was 33, so it wouldn't have been a fair fight.
So I forget your background now. I never studied journalism. I came up through the English literature route and stuff, but are you a trained journalist too?
No, I'm the same with you. I was an English major in college, and I took an internship my senior year with a local newspaper, you know, just a weekly suburban newspaper. I'd never been on the school newspaper. I'd never done it in high school. I became an English major my senior year, and I really liked it. I was a naturally pretty good writer, and I got on the paper, and I thought, this is cool. This is fun. I really like seeing my byline. I have to admit, the ego boost was tremendous.
Yep.
So when I got my first couple of stories published, I thought, okay, you know, I think I'm hooked. So I said, I'm going to move to New York and become the great American writer. But like you, with no training.
Yes.
So for 6 months, I was the great American bartender, trying to get my career started.
But you get great stories in bars, man.
That's true. I had an English professor who said, you can't be a writer unless you're a bartender or a cab driver first.
So, I mean, it was different then. There were markets. There were guys like us. We would not make it today. The Times Union, a small to medium-sized newspaper, you know, demands a journalism degree. We were getting students coming through with master's degree from Columbia. I mean, how did you break in? Just kind of got your first things published, or got your foot in the door as like a clerk and moved up, or how did you?
Yeah, well, I started, I wanted to work for the Times or for Esquire. I had great dreams, and I quickly realized I didn't have the experience.
Right.
So I went the trade magazine route. I knew some people who were a little older than me, and they said, get your feet wet, go trade mags. So I got a job. And like you said, back then there were hundreds of jobs in trade magazines. So I worked for a pretty big company that was located right in Times Square, and I learned the business. I did everything from photography to writing to layout. And this was pre-computer. So, it was paste up boards and X-Acto knives and glue pots. So, I learned everything, and I worked there for about a year maybe. And then I saw an ad in the New York Times for the lowest level of research editor at Sport Magazine. I played sports in high school. I love sports, so I knew it. And I was lucky enough to get the job. So I started at the bottom of Sport Magazine and moved my way up to senior editor over the course of about 8 years.
Wow. So, I mean, remind me, who was funding Sport? Because it was splashy and glossy for a while, but it kind of had a short life, right?
Well, it was the first sports magazine. It was out before Sports Illustrated. It started right after the war. Wow. It was a monthly. Its heyday was the 50s and early 60s. By the time I got there in 1981, monthlies were already kind of obsolete because now you needed to be weekly, and cable TV was just starting, so even weeklies were obsolete. ESPN was just getting its foothold into the media world. So, you knew stuff as it happened. So coming out 2 months after you wrote a story was hard. You just couldn't be current. So we did a lot of features, which was great, which I liked better than, game day coverage. Right. So we did features of athletes. We did sort of trend stories. It was terrific. It was fun.
Yeah.
And I learned how to write. I was young, and there were some really smart editors there who were older and wiser and really taught me, do this, don't do that. And just the course of over 8 years, I got a lot better.
So when you came to Albany, what year did you come here again?
1988.
Yeah, which was right when the Knickerbocker News folded. And it was
Right.
kind of the peak of the capital newspapers, which was the Knickerbocker News and Times Union. So after 1988, it was only the Times Union. Markets for freelancers dry up. But I mean, you've been a freelancer full time, right, for 32 years.
Yes, pretty much. I took some jobs here and there. Like you said, the marketing company in Saratoga, that was a full-time job, and I worked there for 2 or 3 years. Right. But I could freelance on the side. Right. I did books for about 4 or 5 years. Right after I did the Patroons book, I did a few more books. And the money was still decent enough to survive. I didn't get rich, of course. I didn't have any bestsellers, but the money was enough to all right, now this one's done. Let's do the next one.
Right.
And then there were some lean years where, things were tight, as any freelancer has gone through. I'm no different than just about everybody else. But you could get back in the game. Yeah. That is not true anymore. Once the internet came along and everything went online and the fees dropped, as you know, it's really no longer possible to make a living as a full-time freelancer.
But you've managed to, and we're going to talk about this all leads to the Hudson Valley book. You've been a columnist for at least 10 years, right? Hudson Valley Magazine, you write for Westchester County Magazine. You found markets. Are those markets still viable, or are they also drying up? Or?
They are viable, and they've been great to me. COVID has thrown a curveball in all of our lives. So, but this too shall pass, and I hope they'll come back. But yeah, I've been writing for Hudson Valley and Westchester, which are owned by the same company, for about 13, 14 years, regularly. I currently write regularly for U.S. News and World Report. Along with sports, I do a lot of health writing. There's a good market for health journalism. So that's kind of the focus of my work right now. That's where my interest is, and that's where the money is, frankly.
Right.
So I do a lot of that. But Hudson Valley and Westchester are still kind of the fun stuff, the stuff that went into the book I just published, the history, the arts and sciences, that kind of stuff, which is really fun to do.
I know you had a lot of columns to choose from, over 100, and I think you've got about 70 in here with some transitions and introductions, some new material and things. But Were those mostly your ideas or mostly assignments? I mean, there's some really kind of interesting, obscure, quirky, and that's what your style to me is always very readable because it's got a little humor. I mean, you've got a nice light touch, and there's often humor in it. Um, so were these subjects you wanted to do or ones that editors assigned for the most part, or?
It was mixed. As you said, I didn't grow up around here, so I don't know the history of the area like they did. So many of them, especially at first, were assignments. So the way it worked is the editor at the time in 2010, they started a regular monthly history column. And they said, do you want to write it? And I said, sure, that sounds great. First of all, a regular gig is you never say no.
Of course.
And history, if I can do it the way I want to do it, I can't write 600-page books like you can. I can write 6-page stories and like you say, keep a light touch, impart enough interest to, I think people will learn something, but add the humor where it's appropriate, which is what I like to do. My role models, if you will, are people like Bill Bryson,
wow,
Mary Roach, not that I am as good as them, but I do a lot of research. I try to distill everything down into what you can fit into 1,000 or 2,000 words, and then give it my little quirky spin so that, yes, you'll be entertained, but you'll also learn something.
I mean, nobody better than Bill Bryson on that. So what is your length then? They must give you a word length for that column.
Yes, because it's still print. Anywhere from 500 to 2,000, 2,500 words. Some are columns, some became features. Some were just sort of short, front of the book type stuff. So it's a whole mix of things that I've done over the years. Like I said, some of them were big features. Like I did a story, which is kind of timely now, about the history of African Americans in the Hudson Valley. That was a feature, that was a cover story. And that was probably 2,000 to 3,000 words.
Right.
And then, the little short nuggets of whatever, they could be 500 to 800 words, something like that.
I don't know if this is what you found. My experience has always been writing short is harder. I mean, you find that too? I mean, 500 is often much harder than 2,000,
Right, absolutely. I think it was Murray Kempton said something like, he went to cover a fire. This is a famous, probably apocryphal story. He went to cover a fire and he came back and he said, here's 1,000 words. If I had more time, I'd give you 500.
Yeah.
But that's true. That's exactly right. Writing short is a lot harder because you got to find the good. You got to often, as they say, kill your babies. You have parts there that you really love, but they just don't work in the short length of a story. So you have to get rid of them. It is harder and it takes longer to write shorter.
Plus, a monthly magazine, you've got a little bit more time. To me, one of the most favorite parts of the process is the interview and the research. If they paid me to do that and I never had to write the book or the article, it'd be great. And revising is the hard part. But did you get to go out and go to all these interesting, cool places and meet these characters, or was a lot of it just research from sitting at your desk computer or something?
Unfortunately, most of it was sitting at my desk and phone calls.
Yeah.
They don't have a travel budget. Again, we're talking like old farts here, but in the old days, you got an expense account and you could go travel.
Right.
That's not true anymore.
Right.
So even though, a lot of them were within driving distance. So I would go to, I've done a lot of writing about local breweries. It's not in the book, but that's one of the columns I do now is a beer and spirits. So I do get to go to those because I can drive to them and they're fun. I don't mind spending the money to taste their beer or their whiskey.
Yeah.
But most of it is online and phone calls.
Yeah. And how do you change, because in this collection, this new compilation, I would call it, a book on the Hudson Valley. I mean, it's got a nice flow. You've broken it up into themes and things, but then when you write your healthcare serious stories, you got to use a different style. That must just be much more straightforward and factual. And
yes, yeah, that's straight sort of newspaper who, what, when, where, why kind of journalism.
Right.
And writing to me is like music. You just got to play different styles. Here's jazz and here's classical. Classic, you stick to the rules here. Here you can riff a little bit. I find that fun and sort of invigorating because you don't want to get stuck in the same patterns as we all do.
Right.
So it's good to mix it up a little bit. So yes, that's true.
So how did U.S. News and World Report? And are they online only? I don't know if I see them in print anymore, right?
Now, they were one of the first, in fact, to kill the print and go just online. And I honestly can't remember how I got together with them, if they found me or if I found them. But I've been writing for them for about 6 or 7 years.
Right.
Like I say, I've done a lot of health. So they found me and had me start writing about a lot of mental health. That was kind of my beat, if you will. And then I spread out to other areas. And since March, I've been writing a lot about COVID. So that's been a very nice and fun. I mean, like I say, I love health, medicine, science. So that's been really interesting and fun to do.
The nice thing is you're versatile, but I also find if you are a writer that hits the word count, does not blow deadlines or whatever, right? If you have a relationship, so most of these, one editor keeps bringing you work and stuff. Yeah,
for sure. And I worked as an editor, so that's another thing. I know what deadlines are, why they're important. But I've hassled freelance writers because they're late or because their stories are too long or too short.
right.
And nobody likes that. So I appreciate what's needed. I know deadlines are important, and I know word counts are important. So I strive pretty hard to meet those. And, if you do that, like you say, editors like you and they work with you more.
Right. So your book, The Hudson Valley, and I like, first 250 million years, you've got playful titles too, which I assume you might write the titles on your columns and stuff too, because they're kind of fun.
Yes, I do.
That came out right at the beginning of February. So you had some book signings and then everything got shut down. Talk about what's the trajectory of this book then?
Yeah, at first it was great. It came out February 1st. I had a launch event at the Albany Institute of History and Art, which was really great. It was very well attended. I gave a little, talk, slideshow, sold some books. After that, I went to most of the local bookstores, the Book House, Market Block, Open Door in Schenectady. And then I went down to Rhinebeck, and I can't even remember where else. So I got about 5 or 6 weeks worth of events. Then COVID hit and everything shut down, and I had some other really cool events that were unfortunately canceled. I was scheduled to read at the Franklin Roosevelt Museum for their annual, they have an annual history reading event, and I was one of 4 or 5 authors that they had invited. Unfortunately, of course, that's gone. Right. There's a really cool book fair in Connecticut at the end of July that had hundreds of people to benefit a local library. I can't think of the name of it, but anyway, also canceled. Yeah. So, like everybody else, we're all just kind of on hold. Everything's kind of stopped.
Exactly. How are your wife and daughter and you doing in quarantine? I mean, obviously you can't get out and promote the book at bookstores, but how else? Is there some freelance writing? You say you've been doing articles on COVID. For which publications or what kinds of stories?
Yeah, so U.S. News is my daily gig. I have another publisher that I do some other healthcare stuff with. Unfortunately, Hudson Valley has had to cut their freelance budgets, and a couple of other places I work with have had to cut their freelance budgets. So that's slowed down a little bit.
Right.
But we're lucky. The rest of us are doing fine. My wife's a teacher, so she's gearing up for school. My daughter's in college. They're all trying to figure out, what's going to happen in September.
But those jobs, I mean, even and the whole landscape of schools. I mean, higher education. Most of us schools in the capital region, are going to go from August 24th to right before Thanksgiving. So we keep the students kind of in quarantine on campus. That's going to be a challenge, but I also think about how are elementary school kids going to social distance and not run up and hug each other and things. And I don't know, what is your wife's school going to start as usual, or is it changed? Or?
That's the plan. They just, in fact, had a meeting a couple of days ago that the plan is, yes, they're going to start up. The older kids are going to go on a staggered schedule, upper middle school and high school, kind of every other day or 2 days on, 2 days off.
Right.
And they're going to open up some space so that they can spread out the elementary and lower middle school kids. So they have a little more ability to social distance. But yeah, nobody really knows if it's going to work or not. You know, the plan, and even in college, my daughter, you know, is planning to go back and live in her dorm, but they're changing the housing rules and the dining hall rules and the classroom rules, and it's like everybody else. We're just kind of trying to make it up on the fly and hope it works.
Right, and they're giving everyone choice. You know, if you want to stay home and just do it all online, that's fine. If you want to, you can even come to campus and still do it like we're doing on Zoom instead of going into the classroom. It is a lot of unknowns and a lot of speculation about how it's going to work out.
Yeah, for sure. We gave my daughter the choice, and of course she said, you know, if she had to stay home another month, she'd kill all of us. So she's going back to school.
I'm hearing from a lot of parents. Our two kids are grown and out and on their own and things, but yeah, it's like, please get the kids back in school. They can't.
Yeah. No, but she's 19. She's not 7. And like you said, how are we going to keep 7-year-olds apart? That's going to be really tricky. The 19-year-olds have enough, you know, frontal lobes, I think, to know what to do and what not to do.
Right.
The younger kids are going to be more challenging.
So as a freelance writer, you know, who's earned your living by your words so long, what do you see currently and going forward? I mean, you got to keep reinventing yourself. You did some books, you worked in some marketing, healthcare, sports. What's next? Do you think, I mean, so many people are going to, you know, Instagram or the blogs, I think, have kind of peaked, don't you? I mean, they're going more to like short little videos and things. I mean, where do you see your writing career going next?
I'm not a social media guy. I just haven't invested the time to really learn it, and I just don't like it. You know, I hate to say it, but I'm just not of that generation, and it doesn't interest me. As long as I can keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to keep doing that. Like I said, COVID has thrown a curveball, but that won't be forever. You know, we hope. So I'm hoping that in a few months things will return to normal. Again, I'm fortunate enough to be able to weather a little downtime. You know, I'm still making, you know, enough of a living and still have enough work to keep the lights on and the air conditioners running. So as long as I can do that, I'm going to keep doing that. I don't really have a plan B. I guess that's my best answer, you know. If things require more change, I'll look into it, but right now they don't. So I'm fortunate, like you said, I've been doing it long enough. I have enough connections. I have enough contacts. I have enough work that I can still support myself and my family. So, and I still love it. You know, that's the other thing. I still like what I do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love my job at the Writers Institute, and you know, we bring in great writers all the time. I get to work with students, but I still I write a weekly column at the Times Union just to, you meet interesting people. That's the joy of this thing, and you learn things. I always feel like I'm getting a continuing education by being a journalist, you know?
Absolutely, and every story is different. Every day is different. You know, there are some things that are tedious about the job, like any other job, but you know, it's literally a blank page every time you start a new story. So, and that's fascinating to me.
What about teaching? I mean, I know a lot of, and I used to adjunct when I was at the paper, and a lot of my colleagues doing things. Have you tried teaching? Is that an avenue you like?
I haven't tried it. I haven't really needed to. I've thought about it, but I haven't really figured out how to do it. I've never done it in the past. And yes, if needed, I would pursue that. You know, I haven't heard a lot of great things about adjunct teaching. People who have done it don't really like it that much.
It's another low paid, kind of like freelance writer, you know?
Exactly.
Low paid, overworked. No, but I do find that, you know, I don't know, well, I know a few, but it's always been a very small percentage that are like book writers, and they can make enough just by writing books. Everybody's got a side hustle, a couple extra gigs. I mean, and as we've seen, you know, we've been in the game for 40 years. We've seen how it's changed. Do you think it's more the technology, or I hate to be a pessimist, I think it's a devaluing of words, that people's attention span, with so much coming at them all the time. I've watched these statistics from the American Library Association, the percentage of Americans, how many books do you read in a year? How many, it used to be, you know, a dozen or whatever, then it was down to 5. Now it's down to half of Americans don't even read one book.
I know.
So what does that do for book writers or booksellers or book publishers? But
Absolutely. I think,
where do you see it? Where do you see the disconnect? Why it wasn't like when we broke in the 80s? Why is it different now, do you think? Is it technology?
They're all tied together, but I blame, if you will, technology. And the choice early on when the internet came out that newspapers and magazines and other publishers made to give their stuff away for free.
Right.
And once it's for free, it's hard to pull back.
Right.
So there's the devaluation of writing right there. The second thing is the short attention span of people younger than us. Not only books, but movies. Kids don't even have the attention span to watch a 2-hour movie anymore, much less read a book over the course of a week or 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the nuggetization of information, if that's a word. We used to call it popcorn because in our day, long stories were being shortened, and we were all kind of in an uproar about that. I can't do 500 words on this. I need 5,000 words. And the front of the magazines would be these little 50-word nuggets, which we'd call popcorn, fast food, and that's sort of taken over. And I don't guess what's the future. I don't see it going back.
Right.
So it's a good question. I don't know where writers will come from. I don't know how people are doing it. I wouldn't want to be 22 or 25 and try to get into the business now. I don't know how they're doing it.
Right.
Except for the blogs and, the basic, what's the word? Clickbait. You're just writing stuff to get eyeballs.
Yes.
And there's no passion. There's no soul. It's just, I got to get views so I can get paid.
I think the other thing you sort of hit it when you said giving it away for free. There's so many websites that are built on a free content model. I mean, Arianna Huffington got some of the great writers and journalists to produce for her for free, and they thought, well, I'm building my platform because I get a little tagline. Here's my book. Here's my website. And then she sells the company for 40 million or something. Well, Arianna Huffington made out well, but all the unpaid writers, what did they get? I see that more and more. There is some tremendous writing on the web, but it's they're not getting paid, and it undercuts writers who write for a living, I think.
Right, and there's just too much. I mean, we're missing editing, we're missing curating.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of good stuff on the internet. There's also a lot of garbage on the internet,
right.
And nobody's saying no. If you sent a bad manuscript to a publisher, they'd say, no, we're not publishing this.
Right.
Unfortunately, a lot of good stuff didn't get published, but there's no curation anymore. There's just everything. It's just a regurgitation. Whoever has a thought puts it out, and it gets equal weight with legitimate, serious writers. And that's
this is what we're sounding like old geezers. We're sounding like fathers now. Every time I get together with guys, with colleagues, women, men, former journalists and stuff, this is the conversation we get to, because I saw the golden age of newspapers where there was a lot of space, and we got maybe a 2% raise, but it was a livable wage. Mm-hmm. And you must have felt that way with freelancing and magazines. I mean, magazines were king up until the early 2000s or something, or
we're dinosaurs, Paul. We just have to admit it.
You write about dinosaurs.
I do write about dinosaurs, and the internet is the meteor that killed off the dinosaurs. That's my analogy of the day.
Well, if we're gonna be dinosaurs, I want to be at least a T-Rex instead of some vegan thing. I want to be an omnivore.
Yeah, well, me too. And we're still roaming the earth. We haven't been extincted yet. Right. And we get to play. We're lucky. We get to play with words. We get to meet smart people who do interesting things. So we're not dead yet, at least.
Exactly. I mean, we have had a good run. Anyone who can make a living by doing something as fun as writing and interviewing people is lucky. And I still think there's a little gas in the tank.
Yeah, there is. I mean, nobody's going to stop reading. It's changing.
Right.
And, if we're too old to adapt, then that's our fault. The young people, they'll figure it out, and there'll be something out there.
Right.
It won't be anything we recognize, but the words won't go away, and writing won't go away.
I don't know, man. It's all emojis now. There's no words. There's no time for.
Well, that's true too. Okay, so maybe we're going back to hieroglyphics.
I do not use emojis, but people just send me these strings now. And I go, what is this? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we are sounding like a couple of old timers, but I often like to ask, do you have a copy of your book with you? Do you want to read an intro or a page? Excellent. Should hold it up. And also, let's talk about, you do have another event coming up. Do you want to mention that?
Yeah, sure. At the end of September, it's going to be online. I'm doing a virtual reading and presentation for the Schenectady Public Library. It'll be the song and dance that I've been doing at all the bookstores. I have a PowerPoint. I read from various chapters, and then I do a little question and answer just to test people's knowledge of the Hudson Valley.
Right.
That would be
I want to take the test. I might fail miserably.
September 21st, go on to the Schenectady Library's website. They have a lunchtime, I think it's called Books Sandwiched In, and it's Mondays at noon. So it'll be, a Zoom event. And so that'll be the first actual presentation I've done since COVID. That'll be fun. Like I said, September 21st. And I hope more of these come along. Now that bookstores and libraries are sort of reopening, I was going to do an event with the Albany Public Library that got canceled, and I'm hoping that maybe they'll do something online.
Right.
But it's a fun way. You can, yes, I will read. I read from about 10 chapters, just a couple of paragraphs, and then I throw out a question.
What do you find is like the audience pleasers, or what sections do you go to? What are your go-to pitches?
The one that is most interesting to me and to people who didn't grow up around here is the story about Hudson, New York. And I just gave away the answer to the quiz, which shows me why I'm not Alex Trebek. But did you know that Hudson, New York was founded as a whaling village?
I actually knew a little bit of this because I like going down to Hudson, but I don't know the extent that you've written about. I haven't done the research you've done.
So in the 1840s, it was just a farm village of about 10 families. And this was right after the War of 1812, and the whaling industry was suffering. So some guys came from Nantucket looking for a place to start a whaling industry. And they started in Long Island Sound and New York Harbor, and nothing seemed to work. And they came all the way up to Hudson, where they found a bay that was deep enough that they could send out ships. So they built a whole village. They bought the farmland. They laid out the street pattern. They built all the industry that needs to support whaling, the rope makers, the blubber, boilers, everything like that. And they just basically built a city to do whaling, even though it's 100+ miles from the ocean.
Right.
I was shocked at that. Who would think that whaling ships came from Hudson, New York? And some other whaling companies started up in Poughkeepsie. And for, 50 years or so, it was one of the centers of whaling in the United States.
Yeah, it is amazing. They have a whale as their logo. I know They still like to reference that. And
but most people don't know why.
No.
It could just be a cute little mascot, but no, the city was founded as a whaling center. Now, to me, that's just nuts. And I love that stuff.
Right. No, that's great. You also have some really interesting, colorful characters. It's been populated by, risk takers and people who thought outside the box. Any couple favorite quirky historical figures that you focus on?
Well, Legs Diamond is probably the most famous gangster from the area, and Bill Kennedy, of course, wrote a great novel about him. But the actual story of Legs Diamond is just as interesting as the fictional version. And he was of course killed in Albany.
Right.
He set up shop down in Kingston and Catskill in that area. So he was a real character.
Right.
One of the great characters that I came across was a woman in the 1890s who was one of the worst serial killers in the history of the United States. The New York Times called her the worst woman in the world when she was finally caught and captured. And she stalked Sullivan County and down in the Catskills for several years, and she killed at least 6 people, several of them her husbands or ex-husbands. So for true crime, that's a great story.
Right.
She's fun. The nature writer
Burroughs.
I didn't know anything about him. Fascinating guy. And his house is still, you can visit his house down in the valley sometime. But he was one of the leading writers of any kind in the country during his time.
Right.
So lots, you know, what I say in my lecture is that the Hudson Valley has as much history as any place in America. It's probably the one of only 2 or 3 places that has 400 years of white European history.
Right.
No place else in the country can go back to 1609. You know, that's even before the Pilgrims came to Plymouth Rock.
Right.
So a lot of stuff has happened here. Pretty much anything that's made this country happened here first.
Right.
You know, like I talk about the African-American experience. The Dutch brought slaves here before, well, not before, but about the same time as the British brought slaves to Jamestown. Mm-hmm. So we have a long history of African-American contention.
Right.
We were a slave society, as in many ways as bad or worse than the South, that most people in the Hudson Valley either don't know or tend to diminish.
Right.
So the slave society that fostered this area was a very important part of our history, and people should know more about that.
I like how, and I know you don't call yourself a historian, you're a journalist, you're a generalist, but you dive in, you find interesting pieces, and then you have the skill to weave it together in a very readable style. I like the Bill Bryson comparison. Any other writers, past or present, that you really admire who can do that?
Like I said, Amy Roach, Mary Roach, not Amy Roach, Mary Roach, who does similar things. She does some really cool and funny stuff, a lot about science.
Yeah.
She wrote a hilarious book about space travel. I'm a big space nerd. And she wrote basically the same kind of thing, a book about how hard it is for humans to live in space. Fascinating and hilarious and gross, and just, you know, I love her books.
Right.
You know, Calvin Trillin, of course, one of the great journalists of all time, who can play it straight and can play it as funny as anybody.
Yep.
So, you know, those have always been the people I like to read the most.
Yeah, they're good choices. Do you want to read a short section, David, before we wrap up?
Sure. Do you have anything that you remember that you particularly liked?
I always like the, you know, overview and introduction. I thought you set it up well.
Let's see. What can we pick? You know what? Instead, I call this a mostly chronological and occasionally personal history.
Yeah.
Because some of these are personal essays.
Right.
Magazine has sort of a back page where you write personal stuff. So the Hudson Valley, as you know, not recently, but now 10 or 15 years ago, erected the Walkway over the Hudson, which has become one of the great tourist attractions of the Hudson Valley. You know, they took an old train trestle and they turned it into a walkway. And I walked over it, but with a little twist. Now let me see if I can find it. I'm sorry, hold on. Where the heck is it? I need to take off my glasses so I can read. Of course, I can't find it now. That's crazy. Let's talk about something else while I'm looking.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think U.S. News and World Report is a very nice gig you've got.
Yes, it is. And I'm very happy to work with it. I'm sorry, here it is. Okay. So this piece is called Weathering Heights. Others ran, biked, skated, and strolled across the walkway over the Hudson. Could I? I didn't used to be a wuss. And I'm not sure exactly when I became a wuss. But now, a wuss is what I am. And my wussiness reared its wussy head about 50 yards into my family's initial foray onto the walkway over the Hudson. Hello, my name is David. I'm an acrophobe. I'm afraid of heights. I'm not fearful by nature, really. I have no other phobias. I'll eat just about anything, go just about anywhere. Snakes, no problem. Bugs, don't love them, but happy to kill spiders when my wife asks. Germs, please. I play hockey, and have you ever been in a hockey locker room? But about 25 years ago, out of the blue, I suddenly got, I believe the technical term is creeped out, when driving over a bridge. Looking down from a balcony or rooftop shivered me timbers. I couldn't get within 10 feet of a cliff's edge. I never had this problem as a kid. I remember thinking, where the hell did this come from? And I still think that every time I feel its wussy presence. It's not always a logical phobia, which I suppose is an oxymoron, isn't it? I'm fine in airplanes, but not so much in cars. Inside the penthouse, I'm all, look at that view. Out on the terrace, I'm jello in a moving subway. My family, of course, is well aware of my predicament. Are you going to be okay with this? My wife, Kimberly, asked when she saw me slide to the absolute center of the walkway. Fine, I barked in one syllable. Since I was clearly not fine, my daughter Grace then asked me every 3 minutes or so, are you okay, Daddy? Are you okay, Daddy? Are you okay, Daddy? I'm going to push through this, I said. I'm not petrified, stuck to the ground, unable to move. I'm just a little queasy. My anxiety needle ticks up a couple of notches, like when the cop car pulls up behind you and follows you for a few moments before he tears off after the other guy. I'm going to make it across, I told myself. But man, it's really high up here. Meanwhile, a grand parade passed in each direction. Some were on foot, runners, walkers, limpers. Some were on wheels, bikers, skateboarders, rollerbladers, babies and strollers, seniors in wheelchairs. Dogs could do it. Cats could do it. Yes, someone had a cat on a leash. All of them seemed completely oblivious to the fact that they were 100 plus feet above a turbulent river and could what exactly? I asked myself. Reasoning with a phobia is like arguing with a Fox News fan, but I tried anyway. Could the bridge collapse? Short of a major earthquake or terrorist attack? No, it couldn't. Could you fall off? Short of the previous two events or downing a fifth of bourbon? No, you couldn't. What else you got, fraidy cat? I challenged myself. I knew I had nothing to fear but my fear itself. Then, just then, a tiny boy, not more than 4 or 5, zipped past me on a tricycle. His head was down, his legs were pumping furiously. He was having the kind of pure fun only a tyke on a trike can have. And he was 100 plus feet above a turbulent river. I said, what else you got, wuss? I got nothing. So I made it to the other side of the river and walked back with my family. I still hewed to the center rivets mostly, but I did edge toward the edge to read the informational placards on each side of the bridge. And by the end, I had found a steady state, a walking rhythm that let me actually enjoy where I was. It really is quite beautiful up there.
Nice.
Well, that's a little something, something.
You overcame your inner wussiness. I like it.
I did. It wasn't easy. And I don't know if I do it again, but I did it.
That's a good example of your personal essay. It's got a lot of humor and really some nice turns of phrase and touches.
And it's not as much history as the other pieces, but it does give a sense of my style.
That's nice. So
Thanks.
We've been speaking to David Levine. I would mention his book is the Hudson Valley. It's from Globe Pequot Press. You can find it in your local independent bookstore, or you can find it online. You can tune in, and we will give the information about the Schenectady Public Library event. And all of our interviews are archived on our YouTube channel at New York State Writers Institute, on our website, NYSWritersInstitute.org, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. David, it's been a lot of fun. I haven't talked with you in a while, but I'm glad you're still going strong as a book writer, as a freelance writer, as a columnist. David Levine of Albany, thanks for being on the conversation.
Thank you, Paul. I will mention also, if people want some signed copies, I did get to sign some books at the Book House in Albany, Market Block Books at Troy, the Open Door Books in Schenectady, and the Albany Institute in Albany. So if you call them, you can find some signed copies. I'm sure they're not sold out yet, so
excellent. People love signed copies. Our readers do, and I do as well. And
great.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure.